What if everything you were taught about power was wrong? What if the ones who stayed quiet, felt deeply, and walked away instead of fighting are the ones holding the real control now? For years, narcissists thrived on attention, chaos, and emotional reactions. They fed on confusion, fear, and your need to be understood. But something has shifted. Slowly, silently. Empaths are no longer reacting, they're observing. They're no longer explaining, they're disengaging. And that change is unsettling the people who once felt untouchable. This isn't about revenge, it's about awareness. It's about what happens when someone who used to absorb pain learns how to protect their energy instead. The moment an empath stops feeding the cycle, the entire power structure collapses. And here's the part most people miss. The narcissist feels it before anyone else does. They sense the loss of access. They feel the disconnect. They panic in silence. So the real question isn't whether empaths are becoming dominant. It's whether you've noticed the shift happening inside you already. If this resonates, don't just watch quietly. Drop a comment with one word that describes your journey so far, and subscribe, not out of habit, but because what comes next might explain things you've been feeling but never had words for. Dominance no longer looks the way it used to. It is no longer loud, forceful, or driven by the need to control others. True dominance has shifted inward, and this is where empaths now stand in quiet strength. Empaths are not rising by overpowering anyone, humiliating anyone, or demanding attention. Their power comes from something far more stable and far more difficult to imitate: emotional intelligence. They understand emotions without being ruled by them. They can feel deeply without losing themselves in chaos. Where narcissists rely on intimidation, pressure, and reaction, empaths rely on awareness, timing, and restraint. This difference changes everything. Emotional intelligence allows an empath to read situations clearly, sense manipulation early, and respond with precision rather than impulse. There is no need to argue, prove, or defend. The empath sees what is happening, understands the motive behind it, and chooses whether to engage at all. That choice alone is a form of dominance narcissists cannot tolerate because it removes their control. Discernment is another quiet strength that reshapes the power dynamic. Empaths learn to separate truth from performance, sincerity from strategy. They no longer mistake intensity for importance or attention for value. This discernment allows them to walk away from emotional traps without announcing their exit. And when someone leaves without drama, without explanation, without begging to be understood, the narcissist loses their strongest leverage. Inner regulation is where the real shift happens. Empaths once absorbed everything around them, carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to hold. Now they regulate their inner world. They calm their nervous system. They pause instead of reacting. They breathe instead of exploding. This inner stability creates an unshakable presence. A narcissist feeds on emotional imbalance, on provoking fear, anger, or guilt. When none of those reactions appear, the dynamic collapses. The empath is no longer predictable, no longer reactive, no longer easy to control. This is not dominance built on superiority, it is dominance built on self-mastery. Narcissists cannot mimic this because their sense of self depends on external validation. They need reactions to feel powerful. Empaths, once grounded, no longer offer that fuel. They do not need to win because they are no longer playing the same game. Their calm becomes unsettling, their silence becomes loud, their boundaries become immovable. In this new definition of dominance, power is not about controlling others, it is about controlling your responses, your energy, and your access. Empaths step into this space naturally once they heal, and in doing so, they don't defeat narcissists through force, they simply become unreachable. Narcissists lose power the moment awareness enters the room. Their influence depends on confusion, doubt, and emotional fog. They need people to question their own reality, to second-guess their feelings, and to assume blame for situations they did not create. When awareness is absent, these tactics work quietly and repeatedly, but when awareness grows, the illusion breaks. As society becomes more trauma-informed, people begin to recognize patterns instead of isolated incidents. Gaslighting is no longer dismissed as miscommunication. Emotional withdrawal is no longer mistaken for strength. Love bombing is no longer confused with genuine affection. These behaviors now have names, and once something is named, it loses its mystery and much of its power. Empaths, especially, begin to see clearly. They stop internalizing blame and start observing behavior. This shift changes the dynamic completely. Awareness allows empaths to understand that manipulation is not personal, it is patterned. It follows predictable cycles designed to destabilize, confuse, and control. Once these cycles are recognized, they stop working. The empath no longer reacts from emotion alone, but responds from understanding. Confusion is replaced with clarity, and clarity is something a narcissist cannot manipulate. With awareness comes immunity, not emotional numbness, but emotional wisdom. Empaths learn to trust their intuition again instead of dismissing it. They recognize when conversations are being twisted, when guilt is being used as leverage, and when silence is meant to provoke anxiety. Instead of chasing answers, they step back. Instead of defending themselves, they observe. This refusal to engage emotionally dismantles the narcissist's strategy. Narcissists rely on emotional reactions to maintain control. They provoke to feel powerful. When reactions disappear, so does their sense of dominance. Trauma awareness also teaches empaths that healing does not require fixing the person who hurt them. This realization is devastating to a narcissist whose power depends on being the emotional center of someone else's world. When empaths focus inward, prioritize emotional safety, and choose clarity over chaos, the narcissist is left without influence. There is no confrontation needed, no dramatic ending required. Awareness alone shifts the balance. In informed spaces, manipulation cannot hide. In grounded minds, confusion cannot survive. And where awareness exists, narcissistic power naturally fades. Silence has become the empath's new authority, and it speaks louder than any explanation ever could. In the past, empaths tried to be understood. They explained their intentions, clarified their feelings, and defended their truth, believing that if they spoke clearly enough, the confusion would disappear. But over time, they realized that some people are not listening to understand, they are listening to control. Explaining only fed the cycle. Proving only invited more doubt. Reacting only created more chaos. So the empath changed strategy, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. Emotional non-engagement is not avoidance. It is a conscious choice to step out of a dynamic designed to drain energy and distort reality. When an empath no longer reacts, the narcissist loses their primary source of power. There is no emotional spike to feed on, no argument to twist, no response to provoke. Silence removes relevance. It communicates something words never could. Access is no longer available. This is deeply unsettling to a narcissist whose sense of control depends on visibility and reaction. Without engagement, their tactics fall flat. Accusations echo without impact. Provocations lose momentum. Drama collapses without an audience. The empath's silence is not passive. It is regulated, grounded, and intentional. It comes from inner stability, not fear. By choosing silence, the empath refuses to play a game that only benefits the manipulator. They stop offering emotional labor in situations that demand self-betrayal. In that quiet space, clarity grows. The empath observes instead of absorbing. They listen without internalizing. They respond only when aligned with self-respect. This shift redefines authority. Authority no longer comes from being heard by everyone, but from being unmoved by those who seek control. Silence becomes a boundary that needs no explanation. It protects energy, preserves dignity, and ends power struggles without confrontation. In the absence of reaction, the narcissist is left facing their own emptiness. And in that moment, the empath's silence becomes the most dominant response of all. Boundaries have quietly replaced people-pleasing, and this change has rewritten the power dynamic entirely. Empaths were once known for giving without limits. They offered time, understanding, emotional support, and forgiveness, even when it cost them their peace. They believed love meant endurance, and empathy meant self-sacrifice. That endless giving made them vulnerable, not because empathy is weakness, but because it was unprotected. Over time, many empaths learned a difficult truth. Access is valuable, and not everyone deserves it. With that realization, boundaries were born. Boundaries are not walls built from anger or bitterness. They are clear decisions about where energy goes and where it no longer belongs. Empaths no longer rush to respond, explain, or fix. They no longer carry emotions that are not theirs to carry. They choose when to engage and when to step back. This selective engagement is where real power lives. Narcissists feel this shift immediately. Their influence depends on constant access to attention, reassurance, and emotional labor. When an empath withholds that access, the narcissist experiences it as loss of control. The sudden absence of emotional availability creates discomfort, even panic, because the usual levers no longer work. Guilt no longer pulls. Silence no longer provokes fear. Emotional demands no longer receive automatic compliance. By protecting their energy, empaths reclaim authority over their inner world. They stop negotiating their boundaries to keep peace and start honoring them to keep balance. This does not require confrontation or explanation. A boundary is effective because it is enforced quietly and consistently. Each time an empath chooses self-respect over people-pleasing, the dynamic weakens further. Control over access becomes control over influence. When someone cannot reach you emotionally, they cannot dominate you psychologically. This is why boundaries feel so threatening to narcissists. They expose the truth that power was never taken by force, but given through unlimited access. Once that access is removed, the illusion of dominance fades. What remains is a grounded empath, steady and self-directed, no longer drained by others' needs. In this new dynamic, power is not about how much you give. It is about knowing when not to. Emotional stability now outranks ego, and this shift has quietly changed who holds the real power. Narcissists operate from a fragile self-image that must be constantly protected, inflated, and defended. Beneath the surface confidence lies insecurity that cannot tolerate challenge, disagreement, or emotional independence in others. This fragility drives the need for control, admiration, and dominance. Empaths, on the other hand, are learning to anchor themselves internally. They no longer define their worth through approval, validation, or being needed. Inner stability gives them a grounded sense of self that does not collapse under pressure. When emotions are regulated, chaos loses its effect. Gaslighting fails when reality is trusted. Blame loses its sting when self-worth is no longer negotiable. Emotional stability allows the empath to remain calm in situations designed to provoke reaction. Where a narcissist escalates, the empath steadies. Where accusations are thrown, the empath pauses. This calm presence is not weakness, it is resilience. It signals that manipulation has no entry point. Ego demands constant reinforcement, but stability requires none. This difference creates an invisible shield. Narcissists depend on emotional disturbance to feel powerful. They provoke confusion, guilt, and self-doubt to maintain control. But when an empath is emotionally stable, those tactics fall flat. There is no need to argue facts, defend character, or chase understanding. The empath trusts their internal compass. This trust makes them untouchable by chaos. Stability also allows distance without resentment. The empath can detach without anger, disengage without hostility, and set limits without explanation. This composure is deeply unsettling to someone who relies on emotional reactions. The narcissist senses the loss of influence and often escalates, but escalation only exposes fragility further. In contrast, the empath remains steady, rooted, and self-directed. Emotional stability is quiet, but it is powerful. It outlasts ego, survives manipulation, and creates a form of strength that does not need to dominate to be dominant. Emotional stability now outranks ego, and this shift has quietly changed who holds the real power. Narcissists operate from a fragile self-image that must be constantly protected, inflated, and defended. Beneath the surface confidence lies insecurity that cannot tolerate challenge, disagreement, or emotional independence in others. This fragility drives the need for control, admiration, and dominance. Empaths, on the other hand, are learning to anchor themselves internally. They no longer define their worth through approval, validation, or being needed. Inner stability gives them a grounded sense of self that does not collapse under pressure. When emotions are regulated, chaos loses its effect. Gaslighting fails when reality is trusted. Blame loses its sting when self-worth is no longer negotiable. Emotional stability allows the empath to remain calm in situations designed to provoke reaction. Where a narcissist escalates, the empath steadies. Where accusations are thrown, the empath pauses. This calm presence is not weakness, it is resilience. It signals that manipulation has no entry point. Ego demands constant reinforcement, but stability requires none. This difference creates an invisible shield. Narcissists depend on emotional disturbance to feel powerful. They provoke confusion, guilt, and self-doubt to maintain control. But when an empath is emotionally stable, those tactics fall flat. There is no need to argue facts, defend character, or chase understanding. The empath trusts their internal compass. This trust makes them untouchable by chaos. Stability also allows distance without resentment. The empath can detach without anger, disengage without hostility, and set limits without explanation. This composure is deeply unsettling to someone who relies on emotional reactions. The narcissist senses the loss of influence and often escalates, but escalation only exposes fragility further. In contrast, the empath remains steady, rooted, and self-directed. Emotional stability is quiet, but it is powerful. It outlasts ego, survives manipulation, and creates a form of strength that does not need to dominate to be dominant. Empaths no longer need validation, and this shift strikes at the very heart of narcissistic control. Narcissists rely on admiration, attention, and approval to sustain their sense of self. Their power depends on a constant flow of external validation because internally they are fragile and insecure. In the past, empaths often supplied this without realizing it. They offered reassurance, praise, and understanding, sometimes at the expense of their own energy and self-worth. But as empaths grow in self-awareness, they begin to recognize that their approval is not required for anyone's identity to survive. When an empath validates themselves, they stop feeding the narcissist's supply system. The narcissist no longer receives the admiration they crave, and without it, their influence weakens. This doesn't require confrontation, argument, or dramatic gestures. The absence of reaction alone is enough to collapse the system. The empath's self-validation creates a subtle but undeniable shift in the dynamic. No longer dependent on external reinforcement, they establish emotional independence. This independence makes them untouchable by attempts to provoke, manipulate, or control. When a narcissist encounters someone who does not seek their approval, they become disoriented. Their usual strategies fail, leaving them grasping for influence that is no longer available. The empath's quiet confidence and internal assurance act as a shield, preserving energy, maintaining clarity, and denying power to those who previously thrived on it. Over time, this refusal to seek external validation transforms the relationship entirely. The narcissist is left exposed, powerless, and increasingly irrelevant, while the empath continues to grow, steady and self-directed. In essence, self-validation is a quiet revolution, a way for empaths to reclaim authority without confrontation, to assert independence without aggression, and to render narcissistic control ineffective simply by no longer participating in it. The power shift between empaths and narcissists is subtle, profound, and almost invisible to the outside world. It is not marked by dramatic confrontations, public call-outs, or visible victories. In fact, the most transformative shift occurs entirely within the empath, quietly and privately, without fanfare or announcement. Empaths do not need to overthrow narcissists in public because their power is not derived from domination, influence, or external validation. Instead, the change happens in the internal landscape of the empath, where emotional mastery, self-awareness, and personal growth take precedence. Over time, an empath begins to recognize patterns of manipulation, control, and exploitation. They notice the ways in which their energy has been drained, their confidence chipped away, and their emotional boundaries crossed. But instead of responding with anger, retaliation, or dramatics, the empath begins to grow in silence. This growth is private, deliberate, and intentional. It involves reclaiming energy, prioritizing well-being, and setting internal limits that no one can violate. When an empath cultivates this internal strength, the narcissist's influence naturally diminishes. Without access to emotional fuel, control, or reaction, the narcissist becomes ineffective. They may not understand why their usual strategies no longer work, and their confusion underscores the depth of the internal shift. The internal power of the empath is rooted in self-mastery. They learn to manage their responses, regulate their emotions, and observe behaviors without becoming entangled in them. This level of control cannot be imposed externally. It must be cultivated from within. The empath's focus turns inward on healing, growth, and self-direction. They begin to separate their identity and value from the approval, attention, or recognition of the narcissist. This separation is profound because narcissists rely on others' reactions to maintain their sense of importance. When an empath no longer responds, argues, or explains, the narcissist loses their leverage entirely. In essence, the battle is no longer about winning against the narcissist. It is about outgrowing the need to participate in the toxic dynamic altogether. This internal shift also manifests in emotional independence. Empaths no longer rely on external validation to feel worthy or secure. They no longer allow the narcissist's mood, manipulations, or criticisms to dictate their sense of self. They recognize that emotional energy is finite and that it is their responsibility to protect it. By cultivating self-validation, resilience, and boundaries, the empath creates a space in which the narcissist cannot intrude. The narcissist may continue to attempt manipulation, but the tools that once worked, guilt, gaslighting, flattery, or anger, lose their impact. The empath remains calm, steady, and unaffected, demonstrating that true power is not about control over others, but about mastery over oneself. One of the most remarkable aspects of this shift is that it is entirely private. Friends, family, or colleagues may not even notice the transformation because the empath does not need external acknowledgement. They do not seek revenge, dramatize the situation, or announce their victories. Instead, they simply stop participating in the dynamic that once gave the narcissist influence. By outgrowing the role the narcissist assigned to them, whether that was caretaker, scapegoat, or emotional support, the empath removes the narcissist's ability to operate effectively. The power that was once external, visible, and reactive now exists internally in the empath's capacity to remain sovereign and unaffected. This internal power also extends to decision-making and life choices. Empaths begin to prioritize their own needs, aspirations, and goals without seeking permission or approval. They step into spaces that were previously inaccessible due to manipulation or fear of reprisal. This autonomy further diminishes the narcissist's influence because it demonstrates that control is no longer possible. The narcissist may react with confusion, frustration, or even attempts to reassert dominance, but by this stage, the empath has already outgrown their reach. The real shift has already occurred within, and external attempts to regain control are ineffective. Importantly, this internal power shift is sustainable. External victories can be fleeting, and public confrontation often invites retaliation or ongoing conflict. But when the change happens internally, it is permanent. The empath's sense of self, boundaries, and emotional stability are no longer contingent on the narcissist's behavior. This permanence allows the empath to move forward without resentment, revenge, or attachment. The narcissist, once reliant on external reactions to sustain their ego, becomes powerless because the empath is no longer participating in the game. The dynamic that once existed between them collapses naturally, without aggression, confrontation, or spectacle. Ultimately, the power shift being internal rather than external demonstrates a deeper truth about human dynamics. True dominance is not about overpowering others, forcing compliance, or gaining attention. It is about mastery over one's own mind, emotions, and energy. For empaths, this means recognizing their own worth, protecting their boundaries, and refusing to allow manipulation to dictate their reality. The shift is private, subtle, and often invisible, but its impact is undeniable. By outgrowing the dynamic entirely, empaths remove the narcissist's power without fighting, arguing, or proving anything. They become untouchable not through confrontation, but through self-mastery. In this sense, the strongest victories are the ones that happen quietly, within the mind and heart, leaving the narcissist powerless and the empath free. Intuition has always been a cornerstone of empathic perception, but in today's world, it has evolved into a precise tool that detects manipulation almost instantly. Modern empaths are no longer the passive feelers of emotions they once were. They have trained their minds and honed their instincts to recognize patterns, motives, and inconsistencies with remarkable speed. Where empaths of the past might have taken months or even years to fully understand the dynamics of a manipulative relationship, today's empath can sense the underlying currents within moments. This heightened awareness is not magic, it is the product of self-reflection, observation, and experience combined with an increasing cultural understanding of narcissistic and toxic behaviors. The speed at which empaths can now identify manipulation translates directly into a kind of quiet dominance. The faster an empath perceives deceit, coercion, or hidden agendas, the less power the manipulator has over them. There is no need for confrontation, accusation, or proof, because the empath's internal awareness neutralizes the manipulative tactic before it can take hold. Intuition works like a radar tuned to detect even subtle disruptions in energy. Modern empaths notice when someone's words do not match their actions, when a compliment carries an undercurrent of control, or when a request is framed in a way designed to provoke guilt or obligation. These signals, which might have gone unnoticed in the past, are now instantly recognized, processed, and responded to internally. The empath's response is not reactive, it is deliberate. They may choose silence, distance, or boundary setting, knowing that any engagement beyond what is healthy only fuels the manipulator. The key is speed. The quicker the detection, the quicker the empath can act in alignment with their own energy, effectively cutting off influence before it takes root. This intuitive acuity is amplified by experience. Empaths who have been exposed to repeated manipulation develop an almost automatic recognition system. They do not need to consciously analyze every interaction. Their internal compass flags potential threats instinctively. This is particularly relevant with narcissists, whose methods are often subtle, psychological, and incremental. Gaslighting, guilt-tripping, emotional withdrawal, and love bombing are tactics designed to confuse and destabilize. In the past, empaths might have been caught off guard, questioning their own perceptions and feeling compelled to over-explain or defend themselves. Today, their intuition allows them to detect these patterns as soon as they appear, rendering the narcissist's strategies ineffective. Intuition also allows empaths to anticipate manipulative behavior before it fully manifests. By observing micro-patterns in speech, body language, or timing, the empath can predict the next move of the manipulator. This foresight creates a position of internal authority. The empath is no longer a reactive participant, but a conscious observer, aware of the trajectory of interactions and ready to navigate them with precision. This anticipation is a powerful form of dominance because it denies the narcissist the element of surprise, which has historically been their primary advantage. Moreover, modern empaths combine intuition with reflection and knowledge. Exposure to psychological concepts, trauma-informed practices, and personal development frameworks enhances their natural abilities. Awareness of common manipulative tactics combined with gut instinct accelerates the recognition process. The empath does not simply feel when something is wrong, they understand why it is wrong and what it is designed to achieve. This analytical layer adds a cognitive dimension to intuition, transforming it from a passive sense into an active, strategic tool. It allows the empath to navigate relationships, workplaces, and social dynamics with clarity, avoiding entanglement while maintaining emotional presence and empathy. The speed of awareness directly correlates with dominance because control depends on influence. Narcissists rely on delaying perception, keeping their targets uncertain, doubtful, and reactive. The moment an empath recognizes manipulation, this advantage is nullified. The narcissist may attempt to provoke, but the empath, fully aware of the strategy, is no longer susceptible. They respond according to their own rules rather than the manipulator's agenda. Their emotional and psychological autonomy becomes a fortress, impenetrable to the usual levers of control. In essence, intuition converts awareness into power, allowing the empath to maintain authority over their own experience and interactions. Another important aspect is that intuition enables empaths to maintain compassion without compromise. Recognizing manipulation does not mean reacting with hostility or abandoning empathy altogether. Instead, the empath can respond in ways that preserve their energy while still honoring human complexity. This measured response further disarms narcissists who thrive on emotional overreaction, confrontation, and chaos. By remaining calm, composed, and perceptive, the empath demonstrates that they are operating from mastery rather than fear, insecurity, or obligation. Finally, intuition fosters a cumulative effect. Each interaction strengthens the empath's ability to detect subtle cues, making them increasingly immune to manipulation over time. Patterns that once required repeated exposure are now identifiable immediately. Each recognition reinforces boundaries, self-confidence, and independence. This cumulative wisdom is a quiet but undeniable form of dominance. Unlike the overt displays of control often associated with narcissists, the empath's authority is internal, consistent, and self-sustaining. The faster and more accurately an empath can detect manipulation, the less power remains with the narcissist, and the more autonomy, freedom, and emotional sovereignty the empath enjoys. In conclusion, the modern empath's intuition is a refined instrument of internal power. It allows rapid detection of manipulation, predictive insight into patterns of behavior, and immediate protective action. This internal acuity neutralizes the narcissist's influence, maintains emotional equilibrium, and transforms the empath into an authority within their own life. What once took years to recognize and navigate now happens in moments, demonstrating that true dominance does not require confrontation or aggression. It requires awareness, insight, and the courage to trust one's own perception. In this quiet, deliberate, and intelligent form of self-mastery, the empath's intuition becomes not just a survival mechanism, but the foundation of undeniable power. Detachment represents the final, most transformative level of an empath's evolution, a stage where emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and boundaries converge into a state of complete sovereignty. While empathy allows someone to feel deeply, intuitively understand others, and connect emotionally, detachment ensures that these gifts are not exploited, drained, or weaponized against the empath. In interactions with narcissists, detachment becomes a quiet, unshakable armor, a space where the manipulator can no longer exert influence, provoke reactions, or siphon energy. It is the stage where the dynamic shifts not because the narcissist has been confronted or defeated, but because the empath has outgrown dependence on the narcissist entirely. This form of detachment is not coldness, apathy, or avoidance. It is conscious, balanced, and deliberate. The empath maintains compassion and understanding while refusing to participate in manipulation, drama, or coercion. When empathy is fully balanced with detachment, the narcissist suddenly finds themselves powerless because the source of their leverage, the emotional connection, the reactions, the need for approval, is no longer accessible. In the earlier stages of relationships with narcissists, empaths may have been deeply involved, seeking to understand, repair, or accommodate. They might have tolerated manipulation, overextended themselves, or compromised their own boundaries in the hope that empathy and care would lead to mutual respect or understanding. But narcissists thrive on imbalance. They exploit dependence, emotional investment, and the need for approval. Detachment reverses this by creating a space where the narcissist's influence can no longer reach. It is an internal realignment where the empath places their own emotional well-being and integrity above the manipulator's demands. By stepping back emotionally, the empath prevents the narcissist from maintaining control. There is no longer a reaction to manipulate, no overextension to exploit, and no validation to reinforce the narcissist's fragile ego. The relationship, previously defined by tension, coercion, or control, shifts because the empath is no longer an active participant in the dynamics that gave the narcissist power. Detachment also allows empaths to operate from clarity rather than emotion. Emotional reactivity has always been the narcissist's leverage. Provocations, blame, criticism, and gaslighting are designed to create imbalance, confusion, and self-doubt. When an empath practices detachment, these tactics lose their impact. The empath observes without internalizing, sets boundaries without resentment, and responds from reason and self-respect rather than fear or obligation. This clarity transforms interactions. The narcissist, accustomed to predictable emotional responses, encounters calm, composed, and steady energy instead. It is this steadiness, rooted in detachment, that ultimately dismantles the manipulator's power. Another essential element of detachment is the recognition of autonomy. Empaths at this level understand that they are not responsible for another person's feelings, actions, or reactions. Narcissists rely on creating dependency. They want to be needed, to provoke guilt, or to maintain influence by controlling access to emotional validation. Detachment severs these dependencies. The empath continues to function in their life fully, maintaining relationships, responsibilities, and personal growth independently of the narcissist's approval or control. By reclaiming autonomy, the empath establishes a position of inner authority that the narcissist cannot penetrate. Detachment is also profoundly liberating. It allows the empath to preserve energy, maintain focus, and cultivate personal goals without being consumed by external manipulation. Emotional labor, which once fed the narcissist's sense of power, is now redirected inward. The empath invests in self-care, personal growth, and meaningful connections rather than attempting to manage or repair the narcissist. This shift not only protects the empath, but also exemplifies a form of dominance that is entirely invisible and sustainable. power is no longer about external conflict, it is about internal sovereignty. Furthermore, detachment does not necessitate severing ties or creating distance unless required. It is possible to interact with the narcissist, if circumstances demand it, without re-engaging in the manipulative dynamic. The empath can be physically present, yet emotionally independent. This level of mastery frustrates narcissists because their typical strategies, provocation, emotional withdrawal, manipulation, cannot function without a responsive target. The empath becomes unreachable, not through confrontation, but through internal alignment. This is the highest level of emotional strategy, remaining compassionate while removing vulnerability, staying connected without being controlled, and observing without being ensnared. Importantly, detachment does not eliminate empathy, it refines it. The empath can still feel deeply, understand motivations, and even anticipate manipulative patterns. However, the key difference is that these perceptions no longer translate into exploitation or energy loss. The empath is free to respond from choice rather than compulsion. Detachment allows the empath to maintain relationships without sacrificing well-being. It permits observation without entanglement, understanding without over-involvement, and kindness without compromise of personal boundaries. In short, detachment transforms empathy from a liability into a strategic strength. The result of this final level of development is profound. Narcissists who once held sway through reaction, obligation, and dependency encounter a person who is entirely self-directed and internally regulated. The power dynamic is inverted without confrontation, drama, or external validation. The narcissist's influence wanes because the tools they relied upon, emotional reactivity, dependency, and approval, are no longer effective. The empath becomes untouchable, not through force, argument, or revenge, but through internal mastery and balanced engagement. Ultimately, detachment represents the culmination of an empath's journey toward personal sovereignty. It is the stage where true authority is achieved, quiet, invisible, and unassailable. By balancing empathy with detachment, the empath ensures that they cannot be controlled, manipulated, or drained. They reclaim their energy, their focus, and their life, leaving the narcissist powerless not through conflict, but through the natural consequence of independence. When empathy is paired with detachment, the final level of personal power is reached, demonstrating that true dominance is not about controlling others, it is about fully controlling oneself. This is the ultimate liberation for empaths, a state in which no one can influence, provoke, or define them without consent, and the narcissist, once a source of disruption, becomes irrelevant in the life of someone who has mastered both heart and mind.